The red lights flashed across the bridge like drops of blood. Captain Veltar stared through the main window at the enormous hegemony warship getting closer. His hands shook as he gripped his command chair. The Altarian colony ship New Haven looked tiny next to the massive enemy vessel. For 3,000 years, these aliens had controlled everything. Every planet, every trade route, every species that dared to travel between the stars. They called themselves the hegemony, and they ruled through pure terror. "Captain," his communications officer whispered, his tentacles trembling like leaves in a storm. "They want 50,000 credits, right now, or they'll destroy us." Veltar's heart sank. He looked around his bridge at the scared faces of his crew. Below them, in the passenger sections, were thousands of families, mothers holding their children, fathers trying to stay brave, elderly grandparents who had saved for years just to buy passage on this ship. They were all refugees, running from wars and disasters, hoping to find a new home on the outer edge of the galaxy. 50,000 credits. They might as well have asked for the stars themselves. These people had nothing. They had spent everything they owned just to escape their dying worlds. "How long do we have?" Veltar asked quietly. 5 minutes, sir, maybe less." The captain had seen this happen before, too many times. Ships just like his, filled with innocent people, turned into floating graves because they couldn't pay the hegemony's cruel taxes. The alien empire didn't care about families or dreams or hope. They only cared about showing everyone in the galaxy who was in charge. The hegemony was run by something called the Council of Five. Nobody knew exactly what they looked like. Some said they were ancient beings who had lived for thousands of years. Others whispered they weren't even alive anymore, just machines with the memories of long-dead tyrants. What everyone knew for sure was that they had technology beyond anything else in the galaxy. Their weapons could crack planets in half, their shields were impossible to break. Their ships moved faster than light itself. Outside the window, the hegemony dreadnought's weapons began to glow. Bright blue energy gathered at the tips of massive cannons, each one bigger than Veltar's entire ship. The sound started low, like a monster growling, then grew louder and more terrifying. "Sir, should we try to run?" asked his pilot, a young Altarian who had never seen real combat. Veltar almost laughed, but it would have been too bitter. Run where? The hegemony ship was 10 times faster than theirs. It could destroy them before they even finished turning around. "Send a message to our passengers," Veltar said softly. "Tell them to hold their families close." The weapons fired. Streams of plasma hot enough to melt steel hit the New Haven from 6 different directions. The colony ship didn't even have time to scream before it was torn apart. Thousands of innocent people died in seconds, their dreams of a new life scattered among the stars like dust. The hegemony dreadnought didn't even slow down. To them, it was just another day. Another reminder sent to the galaxy that rebellion meant death. But something else was happening in the deep darkness of space. Far away from this tragedy, sensors were picking up strange readings. A new ship was coming from the very edge of the galaxy. A ship that didn't match any known design in all the databases of all the known species. Something was stirring in the void. Something the hegemony had never seen before. Something human. Space twisted and bent like torn fabric as the human warship Indomitable dropped out of hyperspace. Captain Kim Day felt his stomach lurch from the transition, but his eyes were already focused on the command screens in front of him. After 200 years of staying hidden near Earth, humanity was finally ready to explore the galaxy again. The ship around him hummed with quiet power. Everything was new, untested, built with technology that had never been used in real combat. The Indomitable was sleek and silver, nothing like the bulky warships humans had built centuries ago. This was their first step into the unknown, and Day felt the weight of 800 lives depending on his decisions. "Captain," Lieutenant Park So-young called out from her station, her voice sharp with alarm. "I'm picking up distress signals. Multiple ships in trouble, direction 27 Mark 4. Day leaned forward in his captain's chair. His crew was the best humanity had to offer. They had trained for years, studying old combat records and developing new theories about fighting in space. But they had come out here looking for empty planets to colonize, not for a war. "Or what kind of distress signals?" he asked. "Civilian ships, sir. Looks like refugee vessels. They're being attacked." Commander Lee Minho, Day's tactical officer, was already working at his console. His fingers moved quickly across the controls as data flowed across his screens. "Sir, I'm seeing the attacking ships now. I've never seen anything like them in our databases. They're huge and their weapon signatures are off the charts." Day stood up and walked to the main viewing screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. Massive alien warships, each one 3 times the size of his own vessel, were systematically destroying smaller ships. The smaller vessels were clearly civilian craft, packed with families trying to escape something terrible. But the attackers showed no mercy at all. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers in the darkness. Each flash of light meant hundreds or thousands of innocent people had just died. The attacking ships moved with cold precision, hunting down every refugee vessel they could find. "My God," whispered Park So-young. "They're killing everyone, even the escape pods." Dai watched in horror as the alien ships fired on tiny escape pods that held maybe 5 or 6 people each. These weren't military targets. These were just people trying to survive, and someone was murdering them for sport. "Captain, Commander," Lee said quietly, "those alien ships have technology we've never seen before. Their energy readings are incredible. If we fight them, we might not survive." Day knew Lee was right. Humanity had been hiding near Earth for good reason. The galaxy was dangerous, filled with species that had thousands of years more experience than humans did. The smart thing would be to retreat, to go back to Earth and report what they had seen. But as he watched another civilian ship explode, taking families and children with it, Day felt something burning in his chest. Humanity had spent 2 centuries rebuilding after their own near extinction. They knew what it felt like to face annihilation, to watch their world burn while feeling completely helpless. These refugees were experiencing that same nightmare right now. "All hands to battle stations," Captain Kim Day commanded, his voice carrying across the ship's communication system. "We're going in." The bridge fell silent for a moment. Everyone knew they were about to face an enemy with superior technology and numbers. But they also knew they couldn't just watch innocent people die. Humanity was about to announce itself to the galaxy in the only way that mattered. Not with words or diplomacy, but by standing up to bullies when no one else would. War Captain. Thekmore stood on the bridge of his massive hegemony battleship, watching the slaughter with cold satisfaction. His 4-armed frame towered over his crew as they systematically destroyed the refugee convoy. In his 300 years of service, he had personally overseen the destruction of over 2,000 ships. This was just another day's work. The Suai. Alien Captain's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile as another civilian vessel exploded. "Efficient work," he growled to his weapons officer. "Make sure none of the escape pods survive. We cannot allow word of resistance to spread." That's when his sensors officer called out in confusion. "War Captain. Unknown vessel approaching from Galactic Rim. Single ship, unknown configuration." Thekmore barely glanced at the display. "Another primitive species thinking they can play hero," he sneered, his 4 arms gesturing dismissively. "Probably some local defense force with delusions of grandeur. Prepare primary cannons and show them the price of interfering with hegemony business." But as the human ship Indomitable came into view, something felt different. It moved with a grace that Thekmore had never seen before. Most ships lumbered through space like floating fortresses, but this vessel danced between the stars like it was alive. "Fire!" Thekmore commanded. Massive plasma bolts erupted from his ship's weapons, enough firepower to crack a small moon. But the human ship simply wasn't there anymore. It had vanished and reappeared behind his formation in the blink of an eye. "What sorcery is this?" growled his tactical officer. The Indomitable began its attack, and nothing made sense anymore. The human ship made tiny jumps through hyperspace, appearing for seconds at a time before vanishing again. It was like fighting a ghost that could strike from anywhere, but worse. Then the movement was what happened when the human weapons fired. Thekmore's ships had energy shields that had never been penetrated in 3,000 years of warfare. These barriers could stop planet-killing weapons, turn aside the strongest attacks known to galactic science. The human weapons went right through them like they weren't even there. "Impossible!" Thekmore roared as his escort cruiser exploded in a ball of fire. No species in the galaxy has technology to penetrate hegemony shielding. Our barriers are perfect. On the human ship, Commander Lee Min-ho was coordinating the attack with deadly precision. His fingers flew across his control panel as he analyzed the enemy shields in real time. "Captain, their shield harmonics are locked on fixed frequencies," he reported to Kim Day. "Our adaptive AI is cycling through phase variances faster than their systems can adjust." What Lee didn't say was how terrifying this moment was for humanity. They were fighting enemies with thousands of years more experience, using weapons they had only tested in simulations. Every second they survived was a miracle. The battle moved through space like a deadly dance. The human ship would appear, strike, with surgical precision, then vanish before the hegemony forces could respond. Their massive weapons were useless against an enemy that refused to stay in one place long enough to be targeted. Vecmore watched in growing horror as another of his cruisers died. These aliens were using tactics he had never seen, technology that shouldn't exist. His perfect formation was falling apart as his ships tried desperately to track an enemy that fought like no species he had ever encountered. "All ships converge on my position," he commanded. "Surround them when they appear." But the humans were always one step ahead. The Indomitable led the hegemony forces on a running battle across 3 different star systems, striking and vanishing, leaving destruction in its wake. When the battle finally ended, the impossible had happened. 2 hegemony cruisers were nothing but debris. A heavy battleship limped away with massive damage, and the mysterious human vessel had disappeared into hyperspace like it had never been there at all. For the first time in 3,000 years, someone had defeated the hegemony in open combat. News of the battle spread through hidden resistance networks across the galaxy, faster than light itself. On 1,000 oppressed worlds, people whispered the same word over and over: hope. The throne room of the hegemony's capital ship was a place where fear lived and breathed. War Prime Kethvar, the most feared military commander in the galaxy, stood before the Council of Five like a mountain of controlled rage. His massive body, covered in battle scars from 1,000 conflicts, trembled with barely contained fury. The Council of Five sat in shadows behind glowing screens, their true forms hidden from view. They had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years, and in all that time, no one had ever successfully challenged their power. Until now. "Explain this failure." High Counselor Mordak's voice echoed through the chamber like a death sentence. "How did a single unknown ship destroy 3 of our vessels?" Kethvar's 4 eyes burned with humiliation. In his 500 years of service, he had never faced such an embarrassment. "The aliens call themselves humans, my lord. Their technology is unlike anything we have encountered. They use some form of micro-hyperspace jumping and weapons that bypass our shields entirely. Then learn their weaknesses and destroy them," Mordak commanded coldly, "before their victory inspires others to rebel against our rule." Kethvar bowed, his massive head. "It will be done, my lord. I will assemble the largest hunting force in our history." While the hegemony's most dangerous predator prepared for war, the human ship Indomitable was making discoveries that changed everything. Captain Kim Day stood in the ship's meeting room, surrounded by holographic displays, showing star maps marked with hidden bases and secret routes. "Captain, you need to see this," Lieutenant Park So-young said, her voice filled with a mixture of excitement and horror. "We've been monitoring encrypted communications across the galaxy. There's an entire underground network of resistance fighters." The displays showed dozens of different alien species, all connected by a web of secret messages and hidden supply routes. Some looked like walking trees, others like liquid metal that had learned to think. There were beings made of crystal and creatures that existed as pure energy. All of them had one thing in common: they lived in terror of the hegemony. "They call themselves the Broken Chains," Park continued. "Scattered resistance cells on hundreds of worlds. They've been fighting the hegemony for decades, but they've never had the technology to actually hurt them." Kim Day studied the intelligence reports with growing anger. The hegemony's oppression was worse than humanity had imagined. Entire species had been enslaved. Planets had been stripped of resources until they were lifeless rocks. Children were taken from their families to serve, As soldiers in the hegemony's endless wars, we can't just explore the galaxy and ignore this, Day said quietly. These people need help. Commander Lee Min-ho looked up from his tactical station. Sir, we're just one ship. The hegemony has thousands of vessels. If we keep fighting them, they'll eventually overwhelm us. Maybe, Day replied, but right now we're the only hope these people have. The Indomitable began a campaign of hit-and-run attacks that sent shockwaves through the hegemony's empire. They struck supply convoys carrying weapons to oppressive governors. They destroyed communication relays that coordinated planetary blockades. Each victory was small, but the psychological impact was enormous. On worlds where people had lived in fear for generations, crowds gathered in secret to whisper about the mysterious human ship that could appear anywhere, strike the oppressors, and vanish like a ghost. Hope, long buried under centuries of tyranny, began to stir again, but Kethvar was learning too. Each attack gave him more data about human tactics and capabilities. He assembled a task force of 12 heavy warships, each one powerful enough to destroy entire fleets. His strategy was simple: corner the humans and overwhelm them with sheer firepower. Sir, Commander Lee reported during one of their raids on a hegemony outpost, long-range sensors are detecting a massive force converging on our position. 12 ships, all heavy battle configuration. Captain Kim Day felt his stomach tighten. They had known this moment would come eventually. The hegemony's most dangerous hunter was closing in, and this time there would be nowhere to run. How long until they reach us, he asked. 6 hours, maybe less. The hunt had begun in earnest, and humanity was about to face its greatest test. The Thoros Nebula stretched across space like a massive cloud of glowing gas and cosmic dust. Captain Kim Day had chosen this hiding spot carefully, hoping the swirling colors and electromagnetic interference would mask the Indomitable's presence. But as 12 massive hegemony warships dropped out of hyperspace around them, he realized he had walked straight into a trap. War Prime Kethvar had studied every battle, analyzed every tactic the humans had used. This time, there would be no dancing between the stars, no vanishing acts. His ships formed a perfect sphere around the nebula, blocking every possible escape route. They've learned from our previous fights, Commander Lee Min-ho said grimly, watching the tactical display. As enemy ships moved into position, they're not giving us any room to maneuver this time. On the bridge of his flagship, Kethvar felt satisfaction wash over him like cold water. The humans rely on mobility, he told his crew. Take that away, and they become just another primitive species with delusions of power. The battle began immediately. The Indomitable tried to use its micro-jump technology, but every time it appeared, 3 or 4 hegemony ships were waiting with weapons ready. The human vessel twisted and turned like a trapped animal, but there was nowhere to run. Explosions rocked the ship as hegemony plasma cannons found their mark. In the engineering section, Lieutenant Park So-young watched in horror as control panels sparked and caught fire. "Hull breach on Deck 7, someone shouted over the alarms. "Emergency teams to Section 12. The Indomitable fought back with everything it had, but 12 against 1 was impossible odds. Human weapons scored hits on the enemy ships, but for every bit of damage they dealt, they took 10 times worse in return. "Captain," called out the damage control officer, his voice barely audible over the sound of tearing metal. "We've lost main power to the port weapon systems. Ammunition stores are down to 20%. Kim Day gripped his command chair as another explosion shook the ship. Around him, his crew worked with desperate efficiency, but he could see the fear in their eyes. They all knew they were dying by degrees. "Sir," his first officer said quietly, leaning close so only Day could hear, "maybe we should consider surrender. The crew doesn't deserve to die for a hopeless cause. We've done our best, but—" "Never," Day interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Lieutenant Park, get down to engineering. I need you to prepare the quantum core for emergency overload." Park's face went white. "Sir, that's never been tested at this scale. The theoretical models suggest it could tear apart space itself." "That's what I'm counting on," Day replied. Kethvar's flagship moved in for the killing blow, its massive weapons, charging for a final strike that would reduce the human ship to atoms. The War Prime could taste victory, could already imagine presenting the human captain's head to the Council of Five. In the Indomitable's engineering section, Park So-young's hands shook as she overrode safety system after safety system. The quantum drive that powered their faster-than-light travel was never meant to be pushed beyond its limits. But desperate times called for desperate measures. "Core overload in 30 seconds, she announced over the ship's communication system. "All hands, brace for impact," Captain Day commanded. As Kethvar's weapons fired their killing blow, Day activated the experimental quantum drive in a configuration that existed only in the wildest theories of human scientists. The Indomitable's core didn't just overload, it twisted the fabric of space-time itself. Reality bent and warped around the human ship. A dimensional rift tore open like a wound in the universe, and the unleashed forces reached out with invisible hands. 6 of Kethvar's 12 ships were caught in the distortion and simply ceased to exist, torn apart at the molecular level and scattered across dimensions that had no names. The explosion that followed lit up the entire nebula. When the light faded and space returned to normal, the Indomitable was gone, vanished into hyperspace while the surviving hegemony ships tried to understand what had just happened. War Prime Kethvar stared at the empty space where half his fleet had been just moments before. In one desperate gambit, the humans had turned certain defeat into impossible escape, leaving behind only the echoes of forces that shouldn't exist. His reputation lay in ruins among the cosmic dust, and somewhere in the darkness, the humans were still free. News traveled fast across the galaxy, but hope traveled even faster. Within days of the Battle of Thoros Nebula, grainy recordings of the impossible fight were being passed from hand to hand, tentacle to tentacle, mind to mind, across 1,000 different worlds. In hidden resistance, cells scattered throughout hegemony, space, alien freedom fighters watched the footage over and over again. They saw how a single human ship had faced 12 massive enemy vessels and somehow survived. More importantly, they saw how it was done. On the mining world of Korak's 7th, a group of enslaved rock creatures gathered in an abandoned tunnel to study the human tactics. Their leader, a being made of living stone named Grix, pointed at the holographic display with one massive finger. "Look how they move," he rumbled to his followers. "Not like our old ships that lumber through space like floating mountains. They jump, strike, and vanish before the enemy can respond." Similar conversations were happening everywhere. On the ocean world of Aquatica, dolphin-like beings studied how human weapons had penetrated shields that were supposed to be unbreakable. In the forests of Verdania, tree people learned about adaptive technology that could change and evolve during battle. The Broken Chains Resistance Network, which had operated in shadows for decades, suddenly found itself coordinating the largest rebellion in galactic history. Species that had lived in fear for thousands of years were building weapons based on human designs, organizing strike teams using human tactics. The uprising began on a Tuesday. At exactly the same moment across hundreds of star systems, resistance fighters struck hegemony targets using the rapid strike methods they had learned from studying the Indomitable's battles. Supply depots exploded, communication towers fell, garrison commanders woke up to find their bases under attack by enemies who fought like ghosts. In the crystal palaces of the hegemony capital, the Council of Five received report after report of coordinated attacks. Their perfect order, maintained through fear and overwhelming force for 3 millennia, was crumbling like sand. 17 systems have declared independence, reported their military advisor, his voice shaking with barely controlled panic. 43 more are in open revolt. Our garrison forces are requesting immediate reinforcements on over 200 worlds. High Counselor Mordak sat in his throne of black metal, his ancient mind processing the impossible situation. In all his long existence, nothing like this had ever happened. The galaxy had been peaceful under hegemony rule because no one had ever dared to fight back seriously. "How did this happen so quickly?" demanded another council member. "The humans." "My lord, their victory has inspired every oppressed species in the galaxy. They're using tactics and technologies based on human combat recordings." Mordak's response was swift and terrible. "Then we must remind the galaxy why they feared us in the first place. Authorize Protocol Omega. Deploy the planet killers." The other council members fell silent. Protocol Omega was their ultimate weapon, reserved for only the most desperate situations. The planet-killer dreadnoughts were ships of unimaginable destructive power, each one capable of turning an entire world into molten rock. The first target was Velos Prime, a beautiful world covered in crystal cities that sparkled like jewels in their sun's light. The planet had declared independence just 3 days after the Battle of Thoros Nebula, and its crystalline inhabitants had started building their own version of human-inspired weapons. The planet killer arrived without warning. It was a ship the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that could crack continents. The crystal beings on Velos Prime sent desperate messages asking for mercy, promising to surrender, begging for their children's lives. The hegemonies. Response was silence, followed by annihilation. Plasma bombardment from orbit turned the crystal cities into pools of melted glass. The planet's beautiful formations, built over millions of years, were reduced to slag in minutes. Billions of innocent beings died screaming as their world became a ball of molten rock floating in space. The message was broadcast across the entire galaxy. This is what happens when you defy the hegemony. But instead of crushing the rebellion, the massacre of Velos Prime had the opposite effect. Horror and rage swept through the resistance networks. Species that had been wavering in their support for the uprising now threw themselves fully into the fight. On his damaged ship somewhere, in deep space, Captain Kim Day watched the recordings of Velos Prime's destruction, with tears streaming down his face. The beautiful crystal beings who had built those cities were gone forever, turned to ash because they had dared to hope for freedom. Humanity had lit the spark of rebellion, but now the galaxy was burning, and innocent people were paying the price. War had truly begun. Captain Kim Day sat alone in his ready room, staring at the communication screen with hollow eyes. The Indomitable drifted through empty space, her hull still scarred from the battle at Thoros Nebula. Emergency repairs had stopped the worst of the damage, but the ship would never be the same. Neither would the galaxy. The face on his screen belonged to Kolmara, leader of the Broken Chains Resistance Network. The alien looked ancient, her scaled, skin marked with the scars of a lifetime spent fighting hopeless battles. But now, for the first time since Day had known her, she looked completely defeated. "Captain Day," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we're prepared to surrender to the hegemony. We cannot watch more worlds burn because of what we started." Images flashed across secondary screens, showing the aftermath of the hegemony's response to the rebellion. Velos Prime was just the beginning. Arcturus Station, where millions of refugees had sought shelter, was now a cloud of radioactive dust. The garden world of Elysium, famous for its floating cities, had been turned into molten slag. 12 worlds destroyed in as many days, each one a message written in fire and death. "The planet killers are moving toward the Zentari system next," Kolmara continued, tears streaming down her reptilian face. 3 billion innocent people live there, children who have never even heard of our rebellion. We cannot let them die, for our dreams of freedom. Day wanted to argue, to tell her that surrender wouldn't save anyone. The hegemony would probably execute the resistance leaders and enslave their worlds anyway. But looking at the destruction on his screens, he couldn't find the words. That's when his communications officer called from the bridge. "Captain, priority transmission from Earth. Admiral Yoon Seok-jin on encrypted channel." The screen switched, to show a face that Day knew well. Admiral Yoon had been his instructor at the Naval Academy, a man who had helped rebuild humanity's military after the devastating AI wars. His weathered features looked grim, but determined. "Captain Day," the Admiral said, "we've been monitoring the situation. The Colonial Council has made a decision. The entire Colonial fleet is being deployed to your location. 50 ships, 40,000 Colonial Marines, and every piece of advanced technology we've developed over the past century. We're coming." Day felt his heart skip a beat. 50 ships sounded impressive, but against the hegemony's thousands of vessels, it was barely a drop in the ocean. "Sir, with respect, 50 ships won't be enough to—" "I know the odds, Captain," Admiral Yoon interrupted, "but the Colonial Council believes that some things are worth fighting for, even when victory seems impossible. The question is, are you willing to continue this fight? Day stood up and walked to the small window in his ready room. Outside, stars sparkled against the infinite darkness like diamonds on black silk. Somewhere out there, the hegemony's planet killers were moving toward their next targets. Somewhere else, resistance fighters were making desperate plans to save their families. And somewhere beyond the galactic rim, 50 human ships were racing toward a war they probably couldn't win. He thought about humanity's own history. The species had nearly destroyed itself in the AI wars, fought back from the brink of extinction through sheer stubborn determination. They knew what it meant to face annihilation, to fight when hope seemed lost. "Admiral," Day said finally, "we're not running. Send the fleet." From the bridge, Lieutenant Park So-young's voice carried through the intercom. "Sir, are we really going to fight the entire hegemony? Just us and 50 ships against an empire that's ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years?" Day smiled for the first time in days. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was determined. "Sometimes, Lieutenant, someone has to stand up to bullies, even when the odds are impossible, even when it might cost everything." He opened a channel to Kolmara and the other resistance leaders. "Don't surrender yet. Help is coming. It might not be enough, but humanity doesn't abandon its friends." The choice was made. Humanity would either help free the galaxy or they would all burn together. But they wouldn't run, and they wouldn't let innocent people face extinction alone. The real war was about to begin. Space twisted and warped as 50 human warships materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation. Admiral Yoon Seok-jin stood on the bridge of his flagship, Terra's Pride, watching as his fleet emerged from the void like wolves appearing from a winter storm. They had arrived just in time. Below them, the rebel stronghold at New Carthage was under siege. 300 hegemony vessels surrounded the massive space station where millions of refugees had gathered from across the galaxy. The station's defenders were putting up a brave fight, but everyone knew they couldn't hold out much longer against such overwhelming odds. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported, "Hegemony planet killer Annihilation is moving into position. They're preparing to destroy the entire station." Yoon's jaw tightened. The planet killer was a ship the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons that could turn worlds to ash. If it fired on New Carthage, every living soul aboard the station would die in seconds. "All ships, this is Admiral Yoon," he broadcast across the human fleet. "Execute Thunder Protocol. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and show these bullies what happens when they pick on innocent people." The human fleet scattered like a flock of birds, each ship moving with deadly precision. They had spent months preparing for this moment, studying every engagement the Indomitable had fought, learning from every victory and defeat. Their ships were equipped with the most advanced technology humanity had ever created. Commodore Kim Day, newly promoted after his heroic actions at Thoros Nebula, led a squadron of destroyers toward the Hegemony command ship. The Indomitable had been completely rebuilt, stronger and faster than before, carrying weapons that existed only in theory just months ago. "Remember," Day told his squadron over the communication channel, "we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for every species that's ever been crushed under the hegemony's boot." The battle began with a symphony of destruction. Human ships used coordinated micro-jump tactics, appearing throughout the hegemony formation like ghosts materializing from nightmares. Their adaptive AI systems, learning and evolving with each passing second, countered strategies the hegemony had used successfully for thousands of years. War Prime Kethvar, commanding the hegemony forces from his massive dreadnought, watched in growing horror as his perfect formation fell apart. "How are they everywhere at once?" he roared at his tactical officer. "Our sensors show 50 ships, but they're attacking from 200 different positions." What Kethvar didn't understand was that humanity had learned to fight as one mind, controlling many bodies. Their ships moved in perfect coordination, each one knowing exactly where the others would be at any given moment. When one ship jumped away from an attack, another appeared instantly to take its place. On the ground throughout hegemony space, something even more remarkable was happening. Human colonial marines, transported by fast attack ships, were landing on prison worlds and slave colonies. These weren't just soldiers, they were liberators carrying weapons and supplies for local resistance fighters. Lieutenant Park So-young, now commanding her own ship, led a strike force to the mining world of Korax 7. "Citizens of Korax," she broadcast as her Marines landed, "you are free. Take up arms and fight for your children's future." The response was overwhelming. Enslaved beings who had lived in chains for generations suddenly found themselves armed with human weapons and fighting alongside soldiers who had traveled across the galaxy to help them. The hegemony's control, built on fear and isolation, crumbled. When faced with organized resistance and hope, "Admiral," Commander Lee Minho reported from the Indomitable, "Hegemony command structure is collapsing. We're intercepting panic transmissions from dozens of sectors. Their local commanders are losing control as entire worlds rise up in rebellion." The ancient empire, which had seemed unbreakable just days before, was falling apart like a house of cards in a hurricane. 3,000 years of oppression were ending in a single desperate battle, as courage and determination proved stronger than fear and tyranny. The storm humanity had unleashed was reshaping the galaxy itself. The ancient world of Hegemon Prime hung in space like a dying star, its surface covered in massive cities that had ruled the galaxy for 3,000 years. This was where it would all end, where the Council of Five had retreated for their final desperate stand against the forces of freedom. Above the planet, the largest fleet in galactic history prepared for battle. Admiral Yoon Seok-jin stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking out at an incredible sight. Beside his 50 human warships flew vessels from dozens of liberated species. Ships built by the crystal beings of New Velos, sleek fighters piloted by the dolphin people of Aquatica, massive battleships crewed by the rock creatures of Korax 7. "All ships, this is Admiral Yoon," he broadcast to the combined fleet. "Today we end 3,000 years of tyranny. Today we give the galaxy back to its people." But the hegemony had one final card to play. Rising from the planet's surface came the Eternal Dominion, a ship so massive it defied belief. It was the size of a small moon, built over centuries to be the ultimate expression of hegemony power. Its hull was covered in weapons that could destroy entire fleets, and at its heart sat the Council of Five themselves. "My God," whispered Lieutenant Park So-young from her position on the bridge of the Indomitable. "How do we fight something like that?" Commodore Kim Day, now commanding the flagship of the Liberation Fleet, studied the massive enemy vessel with calm determination. The Indomitable had been rebuilt and upgraded with the most advanced technology humanity possessed, but even so, it looked tiny next to the hegemony's ultimate weapon. "The same way we've always fought them," Day replied quietly. "Together with courage and by never giving up." The battle began with a roar that shook space itself. The Eternal Dominion fired weapons that could crack planets, sending waves of destruction across the battlefield. Ships exploded like fireworks, as the hegemony's ultimate weapon showed why it had never been defeated. But something had changed in the galaxy. The combined fleet didn't break and run like countless others had done before. Instead, they fought with the desperate courage of beings who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Human ships led coordinated attacks, using their micro-jump technology to strike at weak points in the massive vessel's armor. Ships from liberated worlds followed their lead, adapting human tactics to their own capabilities. The crystal beings used their natural ability to manipulate light to blind the enemy's sensors. The rock creatures turned their ships into living battering rams, sacrificing themselves to create openings for others. "All ships, focus fire on the command section," Admiral Yoon ordered as the battle reached its climax. "End this nightmare, once and for all." The Indomitable led the final charge, diving straight toward the heart of the enemy ship, where the Council of Five waited in their throne room. Commodore Kim Day watched the massive structure grow larger and larger on his view screen. "This is for Velos Prime," he whispered as his weapons charged. "This is for every innocent life you destroyed. This is for every child who lived in fear because of you." The human ship's weapons fired at point-blank range, followed by salvos from 100 other vessels. The Eternal Dominion's armor, thought to be impenetrable, cracked and shattered under the combined assault. Explosions cascaded through the massive ship like a chain reaction, each one brighter than the last. When the light faded, the Eternal Dominion was gone. With it died the Council of Five, and the last remnants of their ancient empire. Across the galaxy, beings who had lived their entire lives in slavery felt chains breaking that they hadn't even known existed. On 1,000 worlds, people stepped outside and looked up at the stars without fear for the first time in millennia. In the months that followed, representatives from hundreds of species gathered to create something new. They called it the Galactic Concordat, a democratic alliance where every voice mattered and every species had a say in their own destiny. Humanity could have claimed the galaxy as conquerors, could have simply replaced the hegemony as the new rulers. Instead, they chose to serve as protectors and guides, helping other species learn to govern themselves. The name of the human warship, Indomitable, became legend, spoken of in the same breath as hope and freedom. Parents told their children stories of the brave humans who had traveled across the galaxy to help strangers, who had risked everything to give others a chance at a better life. The age of fear was over. The age of hope had begun, and in the endless darkness between the stars, new ships bearing the symbol of the Galactic Concordat carried explorers and scientists instead of weapons and slaves, spreading knowledge and friendship to the farthest reaches of space. The galaxy was free,